Stephen Murphy. I'm the Director of Military and Veteran Student Services. Work over in the Dean of Students office, and working here with Robin Smith over in Career Advancement Services. So next slide, please. So here's a quick introduction slide on me for a quick background. As an active duty Army officer from 2013 to 2019 prior to switching over to the reserve component where I currently still serve. This is my first year at Catholic University of America. Prior to here, I worked at Syracuse University in New York while getting my master's. So next slide, please. So, considering we do not currently have any students here, we won't go through the whole fact or fiction section, or I'll brief it instead of doing the icebreaker. So, for the statement, a perfect resume is a determining factor on whether you get your ideal job or not. Question, fact or fiction, and it is actually fiction. A great resume is designed to help you get an interview, not to help you get a job. Interviewing is a whole other, yet just as important part of the job search. Next slide, please. So the next point I wanted to make to our students is the question is a resume should primarily document your work history for employers. That is fiction as well. There are three types of resumes: chronological, function, and combination resumes. Next slide, please. So you should not list your salary expectations and your personal references on the resume you send to employers. That is a fact. When discussing salary, only bring that topic up during the interview if asked. If possible, try not to get into salary discussions until you actually have a job offer. Regarding personal references, you don't want to give those out unless the job specifically asks for them, because if you're applying to multiple jobs, you don't want these references to be bombarded by every prospective employer that you're considering. Next slide. So in this slide, I just wanted to go over some tips for helping you highlight some key factors to successfully construct your resume. First, as I said earlier, there are three types of resumes: chronological, function, and combination. There is no specific answer on which of the three types of a resume would work the best. It's on you to determine which of these types best summarizes your qualifications. Next, avoid misspellings. Oh, no, sorry. If you go back, Robin. Right, sorry. So next to a key point is to avoid misspellings, bad grammar, and wordiness. So this is self-explanatory, as typos are one of the biggest ways to remove yourself from consideration for a job. Misspellings and bad grammar make yourself appear unprofessional, while wordiness is a way to make the resume reviewer get bored and lose interests. Irrelevant information and pictures are also distractors that will lead to resume reviewers becoming confused and hopefully not annoyed with your application. Either of these outcomes are bad for your job search. Critical categories missing. These include items such as contact information, your goals, etc. If a job has a certain prerequisite, like for example, I was just working with a student who wanted to be a historian at the Pentagon, and one of the prerequisites for that job was that you need to have a PhD. If in your resume you neglected to bring up that you had a PhD, you're just going to be taking yourself right out of consideration just because of your resume. Unexplained time gaps. If you have a chronological resume and you're missing years without explanation, then that will lead to questions coming to the resume reviewer's mind. If there's a certain time gap, the reviewer could think, what happened here? Did they just have a typo on their resume? Did they just go live at the beach for a year? Nobody knows. If you have a professional gap in your experience, please make sure that it's annotated somewhere in your resume. As in, if you went back to grad school, list that in your education part of your resume. If you had a temporary gap in employment, I would either list the steps you took to make yourself more employable or just use a functional resume. Next, don't use fluff language. Keep your accomplishments as quantifiable and ends-based as possible. Putting on your resume that you, quote, did a great job as a squad leader tells the reviewer absolutely nothing. Another key pitfall is not addressing the hiring manager. If you see a certain point of contact on a job posting, when you email in a copy of your resume, make sure that your message lists them in the email. This shows professionalism, attention to detail, and honestly that you care and really want this job. Next slide, please. So this next slide I found when doing some background research for the presentation and thought it was a pretty solid idea. Step 1, you should write down your military assignments in reverse chronological order. So your most recent job would be first. Identify the key skills that are involved. For jobs such as an Army S4, you could say skills such as logistics management, or for a platoon leader, you could say operations management. Step 2, in the next column, identify the required skills or experience which a prospective employer is looking for. This will be completely dependent on your desired career path. Step 3, compare the skills in each column. If you are missing the required skills, what additional training or schooling is required? A good way to help build up your resume in academia is from student work positions, internships, or academic certificates. For example, programs such as a data analytics program or federal contracting certificate in the Metropolitan School would go a long way in strengthening your resume if you wanted to work at places such as consulting firms. Step 4, make sure that you are not overly using military language. Ensure that you are communicating your message in an industry-relevant way. The next couple slides will dive deeper into this. Step 5, have an outside source critique your resume, preferably someone with industry or civilian work experience. Both my office and the Office of Career Services would be happy to help schedule office hours to help you with this. Step 6, continually refine your product and continue making it better and update it with new job experiences that you have. Next slide, please. So next slide is pretty self-explanatory, but here are some good ideas for equivalent positions to help you translate your job titles that you've had. Next slide, please. The second slide goes over equivalent titles for different staff sections. The S in the title is an Army prefix, but from the best of my knowledge, in the Navy or Air Force staff sections such as the N1 or the A1 should have a similar role. A good resource to help you build your resume is the Department of Labor translator with the link on this slide. Next slide, please. The last of these style slides goes over professional military education and some helpful ways to make them sound more applicable to a civilian resume. However, with this slide and the two previous, don't take these as gospel. If you like one of the other titles on here, feel free to mix and match. After all, it's your resume. Next slide, please. So I know I've been saying throughout the entirety of the presentation that you need to translate your military experiences to civilian professional language. However, if you are seeking directly ties to the military, it honestly may be better to comment exactly on what you did in the military. For me personally, when I applied for this job as the Director of Military and Veteran Student Services, I used a lot of military terminology to accentuate my knowledge base on the military because I felt that it would help me get this job. Again, your resume is job specific and should be tailored toward the job you're pursuing. It shouldn't be the reverse. Next slide, please. So the next couple slides, we're going to go over the three types of resumes. So the first we're going to go over is a chronological resume. Here is a template where Mr. Jones, he goes and details his job experience from 1988 all the way up to the present for every job that he did and a quick summary of what he did in these roles. Next slide, please. By contrast, here is an example of a functional resume. So instead of he has his employment resume where he talks about generally what he did in his career, but instead of that being the general focus of the resume, he focuses more on his key skills that he wants to accentuate, such as personnel planning, management, and his multicultural skills. Next slide, please. So the combination resumes we see here is an attempt by Mr. Brown to try to do both. As I said again, this is 100% your preference. There are certain things that need to be in the resume, but overall, it's on you to decide how you best market the skills you have. Next slide, please. So here are two additional resources that I use to help me build this presentation. The Military to Civilian Resumes and Letters is a little dated, but it has whole chapters of templates for resumes, such as the ones you saw on the previous slides. PCS to Corporate America is more focused on the interview process, but it does have some helpful tips that you can pull from it. However, I would caution that at times it becomes very preachy about how great the Roger Cameron and the JMO firm Cameron Brooks is. So just take the key information that's helpful and kind of ignore the propaganda for a specific company. Also, as another pointer, the book PCS to Corporate America is almost tailored exclusively for those who want to enter the private sector. So if you have students who are looking at the public or nonprofit, this may not be as good of a source. Next slide, please. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I just wanted to open up to any questions you may have.
Can we just ask them? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
I am assuming we're going to get copies of these slides, which would be amazing. But do you have, I mean, there were a couple links. If there are resources for us to help improve our translation from military to civilian speak, that would be awesome. On our website, we have a bunch for, like, there's an engineering resume and a nursing resume, and on it has like key terms to make sure the students utilize them. So if you're a civil engineer, you need to make sure you put AutoCAD as a skill, which is something that I wouldn't know if I didn't have that and I could share that with them. So if there is any sort of translation guide breakdown, that would be awesome.
So in terms of that, Victoria, there isn't, again, there's no sort of like hard and fast specific terminology like you cited for civil engineering. The Department of Labor has the one link in the presentation, which was pretty helpful, I thought. I took those, if we go back a couple slides, Robin, when we went over the job titles, specific job sections, and professional military education, that I was able to lift and basically put into the slideshow itself. But a lot of it is more of an art than a science.
Okay.
Do you find that helpful?
Yes, that was amazing, mostly because it explains things and I wouldn't know how to say most of it or what it would translate to. Like, I don't know what an S4, I mean, I can ask them to explain more about what an S4 does. But yeah.
So it basically, so again, to make sure I didn't confuse anyone in this section. So for example, coming from an Army background, every unit is organized on this structure. It's what's called the Napoleonic staff model. Pretty much, it obviously goes back to Napoleon. It's a pretty consistent method of how military staffs are organized. So again, this S1 deals with predominantly human resources issues. S2 is intelligence. S3 kind of is the operations and driving of the other staff sections. S4 is logistics, S5 is future planning, and S6 is IT. Just while we're on the topic, did that make sense, or does anyone else need any clarification questions on it?
It makes sense.
Okay, I have a cheat sheet. My husband was an S2.
Oh, awesome. Anything else?
And for so would this be classifications for across the board for all students, regardless of, not all students, but regardless of what area of focus, so whether they're the Navy or things like that, or it would be different?
No, it should be the same.
Okay.
From my understanding, again, I was in the Army, but from my understanding, their units, they call them an N1, an N2,
Okay.
an N3, and N4. Air Force is A1, A2, A3, A4. So.
Okay.
But again, if you have any students who you would like additional help with in terms of their translating their military experiences, feel free to email me and I'll be more than happy to work with you on certain students. So. Well, again, thank you for coming out. And Robin, definitely appreciate it. We're both just an email away. And Robin, do you have anything else before we break?
Yes, so I know that you are all advisors, but for the recording, the networking event tomorrow has been rescheduled, so look out for that. And our career fair is on Friday, so we hope to see you there.
Thank you for this.